because I didn't yawn until now. So, I am Lady Rain. This is the Reader's Nook. We are reading The Dead Zone. And we are in Chapter 10, Part 1. The doctor put Vera Smith on blood pressure drug called hydrodural. It didn't lower her blood pressure much. Well, I wonder why it didn't lower her blood pressure. Not a dime's worth. She was fond of writing in her letters. But it didn't make her sick and weak. But it did make her sick and weak. She had to sit down and rest after vacuuming the floor. Climbing a flight of stairs made her stop at the top and pant like a doggy on a hot August afternoon. If Johnny hadn't told her it was for the best, he would have thrown the pills out the window right then. The doctor tried her on another drug, and that made her heart race so alarmingly that she did stop taking it. This is a trial and error procedure, the doctor said. We'll get you fixed up eventually, Vera. Don't worry. I don't worry, Vera said. My faith is in the Lord God. Yes, of course it is. Just as it should be, too. By the end of June, the doctor had settled on a combination of hydrodural and another drug called Aldiment. Fat, yellow, expensive pills, nasty things. When she started taking the two drugs together, it seemed like she had to make water every 15 minutes. She had headaches. She had heart palpitations. The doctor said her blood pressure was down into the normal range again. But she didn't believe him. What good were doctors anyway? Look what they were doing to her Johnny. Cutting him up like butcher's meat. 3 operations already. He looked like a monster with stitches all over his arms, legs, and neck. And couldn't get around without one of those walkers, like old Mrs. Sylvester had to use. If her blood pressure was down, why did she feel so crummy all the time? You've got to give your body time enough to get used to the medication, Johnny said. How long does this mail been? Somebody made a sandwich. I don't know. I don't know. It was the first Saturday in July, and his parents were up for the weekend. Johnny had just come back from hydrotherapy, which is water therapy, and he looked pale and haggard. In each hand he held a small lead ball, and he was raising them and then lowering them into his lap as they talked, flexing his elbows, building up his biceps and triceps. The healing scars had run like slash marks across his elbows and arms, expanded and contracted. Put your faith in God, Johnny, Vera said. There is no need for all this foolishness. Put your faith in God and he'll heal you. Vera, Herb said. Don't you Vera me. This is foolishness. Doesn't the Bible say, ask and shall be given, knock and it shall be opened unto you? There is no need for me to take that evil medication. No need for my boy to let those doctors go on torturing him. It's wrong. It's not helping and it's sinful. Johnny put the balls of lead shot on his bed. The muscles in his arms were trembling. He felt sick to his stomach and exhausted and suddenly furious at his mother. The Lord helps those who help themselves, he said. You don't want the Christian God at all, Mom. You want a magic genie that's going to come out of a bottle and give you 3 wishes. The Lord helps those who help themselves. If you are given something and you decide not to take it as far as medication, then how can the Lord help you when he offers those medications? See? Johnny, well, it's true. Those doctors put that data in your head. All of these crazy ideas. Her lips were trembling, her eyes wide but tearless. God brought you out of that coma to do his will, John. These others, they're just trying to get me back on my feet so I don't have to do God's will from a wheelchair the rest of my life. Let's not have an argument, Herb said. Families shouldn't argue. And hurricanes shouldn't blow, but they do every year. Nothing he could say was going to stop this. It had been coming. If you put your trust in God, Johnny, Vera began, taking no notice of Herb at all. I don't trust anyone anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, she said. Her voice was stiff and distant. Satan's agents are everywhere. they'll try to turn you from your destiny. Looks like they're getting along with it real well. You have to make some kind of eternal thing out of it, don't you? I'll tell you what it is. It was a stupid accident. A couple of kids were dragging, and I just happened to get turned into dog meat. You know what I want, Mom? I want to get out of here. That's all I want. And I want you to go on taking your medication and try to get your feet back on the ground. That's all I want. I'm leaving. She stood up. Her face was pale and drawn. I'll pray for you, Johnny. He looked at her, helpless, frustrated, and unhappy. His anger was gone. He had taken it out on her. Keep taking your medicine, he said. I'll pray that you'll see the light. She left the room, her face set and as grim as stone. Johnny looked helplessly at his father. John, I wish you hadn't done that, Herb said. I'm tired. It doesn't do a thing for my judgment or my temper. Yeah, Herb said. He seemed about to say more and didn't. Is she still planning to go out to California for that flying saucer symposium or whatever it is? Yes, but she may change her mind. You never know from one day to the next, and it's still a month away. You ought to do something. Yeah, what? Put her away? Commit her? John shook his head. I don't know, but maybe it's time you thought about that seriously instead of just acting like it's out of the question. She's sick. You have to see that. Herb said loudly. She was all right before you. Johnny winced as if slapped. Look, I'm sorry, John. I didn't mean that. Okay, Dad. No, I really didn't. Herb's face was a picture of misery. Look, I ought to go after her. She's probably leafletting the hallways by now. Okay. Johnny, just try to forget this and concentrate on getting well. She does love you, and so do I. Don't be hard on us. No, it's all right, Dad. Herb kissed Johnny's cheek. I have to go after her. All right. Herb left. When they were gone, Johnny got up and tottered and took 3 steps between his chair and the bed. Not much, but something. A start. He wished more than his father knew that he hadn't blown up at his mother like that. He wished it because an odd sort of certainty was growing in him that his mother was not going to live much longer. Part 2. Vera stopped taking her medication. Herb talked to her and then cajoled, finally demanded. It did no good. She showed him the letters of her correspondence in Jesus, most of them scowled and full of misspellings, all of them supporting her stand and promising to pray for her. One of them, from a lady in Rhode Island, who had also been at the farm in Vermont, waiting for the end of the world, along with her pet Pomeranian Otis. God is the best medicine, this lady wrote. Ask God, and you will be healed, not doctors who usurp the power of God. Everything I emphasize is in capital letters. It is doctors who have caused all the cancer in this evil world with their devil's meddling. Anyone who has had surgery, for instance, even minor, like tonsils out, sooner or later they will end up with cancer. This is a proven fact. So ask God, pray God, merge your will with his will, and you will be healed. Herb talked to Johnny on the phone, and the next day Johnny called his mother and apologized for being so short with her. He asked her to please start taking the medication again for him. Vera accepted his apology, but refused to go back to the medication. If God needed her treading the earth, then he would see she continued to tread it. If God wanted to call her home, he would do that even if she took a barrel of pills a day. It was a seamless argument, and Johnny's only possible rebuttal was the one that Catholics and Protestants alike have rejected for 1,800 years. That God works his will through the mind of man as well as through the spirit of man. Mama, he said, haven't you thought that God's will was for some doctors to invent that drug so that you could live longer? Can't you even consider that idea? Long distance was no medium for theological argument. She hung up. The next day, Marie Michand Mashad, came into Johnny's room, put her head on his bed, and wept. Here, here, Johnny said, startled and alarmed. What's this? What's wrong? My boy, she said, still crying. My Mark, they operated on him, and it was just like you said. He's fine. He's going to see out of his bad eye again. Thank God. She hugged Johnny, and he hugged her back as best he could. With her warm tears on his own cheek, he thought that whatever had happened to him wasn't all bad. Maybe some things should be told, or seen, or found again. And it wasn't even so far-fetched to think that God was working through him, although his own concept of God was fuzzy and ill-defined. He held Marie and told her how glad he was. He told her to remember that he wasn't the one who had operated on Mark, and that he barely remembered what it was that he had told her. She left shortly after that, drying her eyes as she went, leaving Johnny alone to think. Part 3. Early in August, Dave Pelson came to see Johnny. The Cleves Mills High assistant principal was a small, neat man who wore thick glasses and hush puppies and a series of loud sports jackets. Of all the people who came to see Johnny during the almost endless summer of 1975, Dave had changed the least. The gray was speckled a little more fully through his hair, but that was all. So how are you doing, really? Dave asked, when they had finished their amenities. I'm chilly. I'm always cold lately. Not so bad, Johnny said. I can walk alone now, and if I don't overdo it, I can swim 6 laps in the pool. I get headaches sometimes, real killers, but the doctors say I can expect to go on. I can expect that to go on for some time, maybe the rest of my life. Mind a personal question? If you're going to ask me if I can still get it up, Johnny said with a grin. That's affirmative. That's good to know, but what I wanted to know about is the money. Can you pay for this? Johnny shook his head. I've been in the hospital for going on 5 years. No one but a Rockefeller could pay for that. My father and mother got me into some sort of state-funded program, total disability or something like that. What? Your brother, what is it?
And where's the leftovers from last night?
Probably eaten. Think of something else. Dave nodded. The Extraordinary Disaster Program. I figured that. But how did they keep you out of the state hospital, Johnny? That place is the pits. Dr. Wezek and Dr. Brown saw to that. And they're largely responsible for me having been able to come back as far as I have. I was a guinea pig, Dr. Wetz says. How long can we keep this comatose man from turning into a total vegetable? The physical therapy unit was working on me the last 2 years. I was in a coma. I had mega vitamin shots. My ass still looks like a case of smallpox. Not that they expected any return on the project from me personally. I was assumed to be a terminal case almost from the time I came in. Wezek says that what he and Brown did with me is aggressive life support. He thinks it's the beginning of a response to all the criticism about sustaining life after hope of recovery is gone. Anyway, they couldn't continue to use me if I'd gone over to the state hospital, so they kept me here. Eventually, they would have finished with me, and then I would have gone to the state hospital, where the most sophisticated care you would have gotten would have been a turn every 6 hours to prevent bed sores, Dave said. And if you'd awakened in 1980, you would have been a basket case. I think I would have been a basket case no matter what, Johnny said. He shook his head slowly. I think if someone proposes one more operation on me, I'll go nuts. And I'm still going to have a limp. And I'll never be able to turn my head all the way to the left. When are they letting you go? Or letting you out? In 3 weeks, God willing. Then what? Johnny shrugged. I'm going down home, I guess, to Pawnell. My mother's going to California for a while on a religious thing. Dad and I can use the time to get reacquainted. I got a letter from one of the big literary agents in New York. Well, not him exactly, but one of his assistants. They think there might be a book in what happened to me. I thought I'd try to do 2 or 3 chapters in an online, maybe in an outline. Maybe this guy and his assistant can sell it. The money could come in pretty damn handy. No kidding there. Has there been any other media interest? Well, the guy from the Bangor Daily News who did the original story, Bright, he's good. He'd like to come down to Pawnell after I blow this joint and do a full feature story. I like the guy, but right now I'm holding him off. There's no money in it for me, and right now, frankly, that's what I'm looking for. I'd go on to tell the truth if I thought I could make $200 out of it. My folks' savings are gone. They sold their car and bought a clunker. Dad took a second mortgage on the house when he should have been thinking about retiring and selling it and living on the proceeds. Have you thought about coming back into teaching? Johnny glanced up. Is that an offer? It ain't chopped liver. I'm grateful, Johnny said, but I'm just not going to be ready in September, Dave. I wasn't thinking about September. You must remember Sarah's friend, Anna Stafford. Johnny nodded. Well, she's Anna Beatty now, and she's going to have a baby in December. So, we need an English teacher second semester, light schedule, 4 classes, 1 senior study hall, 2 free periods. Johnny nodded. Are you making a firm offer, Dave? Firm. That's pretty damn good of you, Johnny said hoarsely. Hell with it, Dave said easily. You were a pretty good damn teacher. Can I have a couple of weeks to think it over? Until the 1st of October if you want, Dave said. You'll still be able to work on your book, I think. And if it looks like there might be a possibility there, Johnny nodded. And you might not want to stay down there in Pawnell too long, Dave said. You might find it uncomfortable. Words rose to Johnny's lips, and he had to choke them off. Not for long, Dave. You see, my mother's in the process of blowing her brains out right now. She's just not using a gun. She's going to have a stroke. She'll be dead before Christmas unless my father and I can persuade her to start taking her medicine again. And I don't think we can. And I'm a part of it. How much a part of? I don't know. I don't think I want to know. Instead, he replied, News travels, huh? Dave shrugged. I understand, though, through Sarah, that your mother has had problems adjusting. She'll come around, Johnny. In the meantime, think about it. I will. In fact, I'll give you a tentative yes right now. It would be good to teach again, to get back to normal. You're my man, Dave said. After he left, Johnny lay down on his bed and looked out the window. He was very tired. Back to normal. Somehow he didn't think that was ever really going to happen. He felt one of his headaches coming on. Part 4. The fact that Johnny Smith had come out of his coma with something extra finally did get into the paper, and it made page 1 under Dave Bright's byline. It happened less than a week before Johnny left the hospital. He was in physical therapy, laying on his back on a floor pad. Resting on his belly was a 12-pound medicine ball. Medicine ball. His physical therapist, Eileen McGowan, was standing above him and counting off sit-ups. He was supposed to do 10 of them, and he was currently struggling over number 8. Sweat was streaming down his face, and the healing scars on his neck stood out bright red. Eileen was a small, homely woman with a whipcord body, a nimbus of gorgeous, frizzy red hair, and deep green eyes flecked with hazel. Johnny sometimes called her, with a mixture of irritation and amusement, the world's smallest marine DI. She had ordered and cajoled and demanded him back from a bedfast patient who could barely hold a glass of water to a man who could walk without a cane. Do 3 chin-ups at a time. and do a complete turnaround the hospital pool in 53 seconds. Not Olympic time, but not bad. She was unmarried and lived in a big house in Center Street in Old Town with her 4 cats. She was slate hard, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. Johnny collapsed backward. Nope, he panted. Oh, I don't think so, Eileen. Up, boy, she cried in high and sadistic good humor. Up, up. Just 3 more, and you can have a Coke. Give me my 10-pound ball, and I'll give you 2 more. That 10-pound ball is going into the Guinness Book of Records as the world's biggest suppository if you don't give me 3 more. Up. Ugh, Johnny cried. Jerking through number 8, he flopped back down and jerked up again. Great, Eileen cried. 1 more. Just 1 more. Ugh! Johnny screamed and sat up for the 10th one. He collapsed on the mat, letting the medicine ball roll away. I ruptured myself. Are you happy? All my guts just came loose. They're floating around inside me. I'll sue you, you goddamn harpy! Geez, what a baby, Eileen said, offering him her hand.
Yeah, that's funny.
This is nothing compared to what I've got on for next week. Forget it, Johnny said. All I'm gonna do next time is swim in the... He looked at her, an expression of surprise spreading over his face. His grip tight on her hand until it was almost painful. Johnny, what's wrong? Is it a Charlie horse? Oh gosh, Johnny said mildly. Johnny? He was still gripping her hand, looking into her face with a faraway, dreamy contemplation that made her feel nervous. She had heard things about Johnny Smith, rumors that she had disregarded, with her own brand of hard-headed Scots pragmatism. There was a story that he had predicted Marie Michon's boy was going to be all right, even before the doctors were 100% sure they wanted to try the risky operation. Another rumor had something to do with Dr. Wezek. It was said Johnny had told him his mother was not dead and living someplace in the West Coast under another name. As far as Eileen McGowan was concerned, the stories were so much eyewash, on the par with the confession magazines and sweet, savage love stories so many nurses read on station. But the way he was looking at her, as long as... I don't care. The way he was looking at her now made her feel afraid. It was as if he was looking inside her. Johnny, are you okay? They were alone in the physical therapy room. The big double doors with the frosted glass panels, which gave on the pool area, were closed. Gosh sakes, Johnny said. You better... Yes, there's still time. Just about... What are you talking about? He snapped out of it then. He let go of her hand, but he had gripped it tightly enough to leave white indentations along the back. Call the fire department, he said. You forgot to turn off the burner. The curtains are catching on fire. What? The burner caught the dish towel. The dish towel caught the curtains, Johnny said impatiently. Hurry up and call them. Do you want your house to burn down? Johnny, you can't know. Never mind what I can't know, Johnny said, grabbing her elbow. He got her moving, and they walked across to the doors. Johnny was limping badly on his left leg, as he always did when he was tired. They crossed the room that housed the swimming pool, their heels clacking howlily on the tiles, then went into the first floored hallway and down to the nurse's station. Inside, 2 nurses were drinking coffee, and a third was on the phone, telling someone on the other end how she had redone her apartment. Are you going to call or should I? Johnny asked. Eileen's mind was in a whirl. Her morning routine was as set as a single person's is apt to be. She had gotten up, boiled herself a single egg while she ate a whole grapefruit, unsweetened, and a bowl of all bran. After breakfast, she had dressed and driven to the hospital. Had she turned off the burner? Of course she had. She couldn't specifically remember doing it, but it was habit. She must have. Johnny, really, I don't know where you got the idea. Okay, I will. They were in the nurse's station now, a glassed-in booth, furnished with 3 straight-backed chairs and a hot plate. The little room was dominated by the call board, rows of small lights that flashed red when a patient pushed his call button. 3 of them were flashing now. The 2 nurses went on drinking their coffee and talking about some doctor who had turned up drunk at Benjamin's. The third was apparently talking to her beautician. Pardon me, I have to make a call, Johnny said. The nurse covered the phone with her hand. There's a payphone in the lob. Thanks, Johnny said, and took the phone out of her hand. He pushed for one of the open lines and dialed 0. He got a busy signal. What's wrong with this thing? Hey, the nurse who had been talking to her beautician cried. What the hell do you think you're doing? Give me that. Johnny remembered that he was in the hospital, and with his switchboard and dialed 9 for the outside line, then he hit 0. The disposed nurse, her cheeks flaming with anger, grabbed for the phone. Johnny pushed her away. She whirled, saw Eileen, and took a step forward. Eileen, what's with this crazy guy? She asked stridently. The other 2 nurses had put down their coffee cups and were staring gape-mouthed at Johnny. Eileen shrugged uncomfortably. I don't know, he's just operator. Operator, I want to report a fire in Old Town, Johnny said. Can you give me the correct number to call, please? Hey, one of the nurses said. Whose house is on fire? Eileen shifted her feet nervously. He says mine is. The nurse who had been talking about her apartment to her beautician did a double take. Oh my God, it's that guy, she said. Johnny pointed at the call board, where 5 or 6 lights were flashing now. Why don't you see what those people want? The operator had connected him to the Old Town Fire Department. My name is John Smith, and I need to report a fire. It's at... He looked at Eileen. What's your address? For a moment, Johnny didn't think she was going to tell him. Her mouth worked, but nothing came out. The 2 coffee drinkers had now forsaken their cups and withdrawn to the station's far corner. They were whispering together like little girls in a grammar school. John. Their eyes were wide. Sir, the voice on the other end asked. Come on, Johnny said. Do you want your cats to fry? 624 Center Street, Eileen said reluctantly. Johnny, you've wigged out. Johnny repeated the address on the phone. It's in the kitchen. Your name, sir? John Smith. I'm calling from the East Main Medical Center in Bangor. May I ask how you came by this information? We'd be on the phone the rest of the day. My information is correct. Now go put it out. He banged the phone down. And he said Sam Wesseck's mother was still... She broke off and looked at Johnny. For a moment, he felt all of them looking at him, their eyes lying on his skin like tiny, hot weights. And he knew what would come of this, and it made his stomach turn. Eileen, he said, what? Do you have a friend next door? Yes, Bert and Janet are next door. Either of them home? I guess Janice probably would be, sure. Why don't you give her a call? Eileen nodded, suddenly understanding what he was getting at. She took the phone from his hand and dialed an 827 extension number. The nurses stood by watching avidly, as if they had stepped into a really exciting TV program by accident. Hello, Jan, it's Eileen. Are you in your kitchen? Would you take a look out your window and tell me if everything looks, well, all right over at my place? Well, a friend of mine says, I'll tell you after you go look, okay? Eileen was blushing. Yes, I'll wait. She looked at Johnny and repeated, You've wigged out, Johnny. There was a pause that seemed to go on, then Eileen began listening again. She listened for a long time and then said in a strange, subdued voice, totally unlike her usual one, No, that's not all right. That's all right, Jan. They've been called. No, I can't explain right now, but I'll tell you later. She looked at Johnny. Yes, it is funny how I could have known, but I can explain. At least I think I can. Goodbye. She hung up the phone. They all looked at her, the nurses with avid curiosity, Johnny with his dull certainty. Jan says there's smoke pouring out of my kitchen window, Eileen said. And all 3 nurses sighed in unison. Their eyes wide and somehow accusing turned to Johnny again. Jury eyes, he thought dismally. I ought to go home, Eileen said. The aggressive, cajoling, positive physical therapist was gone, replaced by a small woman who was worried about her cats and her house and her things. I don't know how to thank you, Johnny. I'm sorry I didn't believe you, but she began to weep. One of the nurses moved toward her, but Johnny was there first. He put his arm around her and led her out into the hall. You really can, Eileen whispered what they said. You go on, Johnny said. I'm sure it's going to be fine. There's going to be some minor smoke and water damage, and that's all. The movie poster from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, I think you're going to lose that, but that's all. Yes, okay, thank you, Johnny. God bless you. She kissed him on the cheek and then began to trot down the hall. She looked back once, and the expression on her face was very much like superstitious dread. The nurses were lined up against the glass of the nurses' station, staring at him. Suddenly, they reminded him of crows on a telephone line. Crows staring down at something bright and shiny, something to be pecked at and pulled apart. Go on and answer your calls, he said crossly, and they flinched back at the sound of his voice. He began to limp up the hall toward the elevator, leaving them to start the gossip on its way. He was tired, his legs hurt, his hip joint felt as if they had broken glass in them. He wanted to go to bed. Chapter 11. What are you going to do? Sam Whites asked. Christ, I don't know, Johnny said. How many did you say are down there? About 8. One of them is the Northern New England AP Stringer. And there are people from 2 of the TV stations with cameras and lights. The hospital's director is quite angry with you, Johnny. He feels you have been naughty. Because a lady's house was going to burn down? Johnny asked. All I can say is it must have been one frigging slow news day. As a matter of fact, it wasn't. Ford vetoed 2 bills, the PLO blew up a restaurant in Tel Aviv, and a police dog sniffed out 400 pounds of marijuana at the airport. Then what are they doing here? Johnny asked. When Sam had come in with the news that reporters were gathering in the lobby, his first sinking thought was what his mother might make of this. She was with his father in Pownell, making ready for her California pilgrimage, which began the following week. Neither Johnny nor his father believed the trip was a good idea, and the news that her son had somehow turned psychic might make her cancel it. But in this case, Johnny was very much afraid that the cure might be the greater of the 2 evils. Something like this could set her off for good. On the other hand, this thought suddenly blossomed in his mind with all the force of inspiration. It might persuade her to start taking her medicine again. They're here because what happened is news, Sam said. It is all the classic ingredients. I didn't do anything. You just told Eileen McGowan her house was on fire, and it was, Sam said softly. Come on, Johnny. You must have known this was going to happen sooner or later. I'm no publicity hound, Johnny said grimly. No, I didn't mean to suggest you were. An earthquake is no publicity hound. But the reporters cover it. People want to know. What if I refuse to talk to them? That is not much of an option, Sam replied. They will go away and publish crazy rumors. Then, when you leave the hospital, they will fall on you. They will shove microphones in your face as if you were a senator or a crime boss. Nah. Johnny thought about it. Is Brown down there? Yes. Suppose I ask him to come up. He can get the story and give it to the rest of them. You can do that. But it would make the rest of them extremely unhappy. And an unhappy reporter will be your enemy. Nixon made them unhappy, and they tore him to pieces. Hi! Thank you. Y'all are awesome. You really are. I really appreciate y'all. I'm not Nixon, Johnny said. Was it? Weswick grinned radiantly. Thank God, he said. What do you suggest? Johnny asked. Part 2. The reporter stood up and crowded forward when Johnny stepped through the swinging doors and into the west lobby. He was wearing a white shirt, open at the collar, and a pair of blue jeans that were too big for him. His face was pale, but composed. The scars from the tendon operation stood out clearly on his neck. Flashbulbs popped warm fire at him and made him wince. Questions were babbled. Here, here, Dr. Weswick shouted. This is a convalescent patient. He wants to make a brief statement and he will answer some of your questions, but only if you behave in an orderly fashion. Now fall back and let him breathe. 2 sets of TV light bars flashed on, bathing the lobby in an unearthly glare. Doctors and nurses had gathered by the lounge doorway to watch. Johnny winced away from the lights, wondering if it was what they meant by the limelight. He felt as if all of it might be a dream. Who's you? One of the reporters yelled at Weswick. I am Samuel Weswick. This young man's a doctor. And that name is spelled with 2 X's. It's not even spelled with 2 X's. What the heck? Weizak, and he says it's spelled with 2 X's. What the hell does that even mean? Oh. There was general laughter, and the mood eased a little. Now that makes sense. Johnny, you feel all right? Weswick asked. It was early morning, and his sudden insight that Eileen McGowan's kitchen was catching fire seemed distant and unimportant. The memory of a memory. Sure, he said. What's your statement? One of the reporters called. Well, Johnny said, it's this. My physical therapist is a woman named Eileen McGowan. She's a very nice lady, and she has been helping me get my strength back. I was in an accident, you see, and one of the TV cameras moved in, goggling at him blankly, throwing him off stride for a moment. And I got pretty weak. My muscles sort of collapsed. We were in physical therapy room this morning, just finishing up, and I got the feeling that her house was on fire. That is, to be more specific. Jesus, you sound like an asshole. I felt that she had forgotten to turn off her stove, and that the curtains in the kitchen were about to catch fire. So, we just went and called the fire department, and that's all there was to it. There was a moment's gaping pause as they digested that. I sort of got a feeling, and that's all there was to it. And then the barrage of questions came again. Everything mixed together into a meaningless strew of human voices. Johnny looked around helplessly, feeling disoriented and vulnerable. One at a time, Weswick yelled. Raise your hands where you never school children. Hands waved and Johnny pointed at Dave Bright. Would you call this a psychic experience, Johnny? I would call it a feeling, Johnny answered. I was doing sit-ups and I finished. Miss McGowan took my hand to help me up and I just knew. He pointed at someone else. Mel Allen, Portland Sunny Telegram. Mr. Smith. Was it like a picture in your head? No, not at all, Johnny said. But he was not really able to remember what it had been like. Has this happened to you before, Johnny? A young woman in the slack suit asked. Yes, a few times. Can you tell us about the other incidents? No, I'd rather not. One of the TV reporters raised his hand and Johnny nodded at him. Did you have any of those flashes before your accident and the resulting coma, Mr. Smith? Johnny hesitated. The room seemed very still. The TV lights were warm on his face, like a tropical sun. No, he said. Another barrage of questions. Johnny looked helplessly at Weswick again. Stop! Stop, he bellowed. He looked at Johnny as a roar subsided. You are done, Johnny? I'll answer 2 more questions, Johnny said. Then, really, it's been a long day for me. Yes, ma'am. He was pointing at a stout woman who had wedged herself in between 2 young reporters. Mr. Smith, she said in a loud, carrying, tuba-like voice. Who will be the Democrats' nominee for president next year? I can't tell you that, Johnny said, honestly surprised at the question. How can I tell you that? More hands were raised. Johnny pointed at a tall, sober-faced man in a dark suit. He took 1 step forward. There was something prim and coiled about him. Mr. Smith, I'm Roger DeSalt from the Lewiston Sun, and I would like to know if you have any idea why you should have such an extraordinary ability as this, if indeed you do. Why you, Mr. Smith? Johnny cleared his throat. As I understand your question, you're asking me to justify something I don't understand. I can't do that. Not justify, Mr. Smith, just explain. He thinks I'm hoaxing them or trying. Weswick stepped up beside Johnny. I wonder if I might answer that, he said, or at least attempt to explain why it cannot be answered. Are you psychic too? Dassault asked coldly. Yes, all neurologists must be. It's a requirement, Weswick said. There was a burst of laughter and Dassault flushed. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, this man spent 4.5 years in a coma. We who study the human brain have no idea why he did or why he came out of it. And this is for the simple reason that we do not understand what the coma really is, any more than we understand sleep or the simple act of waking. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not understand the brain of a frog or the brain of an ant. You may quote me on these things. You see, I am fearless. More laughter. They liked Weswick, but Dassault did not laugh. You may also quote me as saying, I believe that this man is now in possession of a very new human ability, or a very old one. Why? If I and my colleagues do not understand the brain of an ant, can I tell you why? I cannot. I can suggest some interesting things to you, however, things that may or may not have bearing. A part of John Smith's brain has been damaged beyond repair, a very small part. But all parts of the brain may be vital. He calls this his dead zone, and there, apparently, a number of trace memories were stored. All of these wiped out memories seem to be part of a set, that of street, road, highway designations, a subset of a larger overall set, that of where it is. This is a small but total aphasia which seems to include both language and visualization skills. Balancing this off, another tiny part of Johnny's brain appears to have awakened, a section of the cerebrum within the parietal lobe. This is one of the deeply grooved sections of the forward or thinking brain. The electrical responses from this section of Smith's brain are way out of line from where they should be. Here is one more thing. The parietal lobe has something to do with the sense of touch. How much or how little, we are not completely sure. And it is very near to that area of the brain that sorts and identifies various shapes and textures. And it has been my own observation that John's flashes are always preceded by some sort of touching. Silence. Reporters were scribbling madly. The TV cameras, which had moved into focus on Weswick, now pulled back to include Johnny in the picture. Is that it, Johnny? Weswick asked again. I guess. Dassault suddenly shouldered his way through the knot of reporters. For a bemused moment, Johnny thought he was going to join them in the front of the doors, possibly for the purpose of a rebuttal. Then he saw that Dassault was slipping something from around his neck. Let's have a demonstration, he said. He was holding a medallion on a fine link gold chain. Let's see what you can do with this. We'll see no such thing, Weswick said. His bushy salt and pepper eyebrows had drawn thunderously together, and he stared down at Dassault like Moses. This man is not a carnival performer, sir. You sure could have fooled me, Dassault said. Either he can or he can't, right? While you were busy suggesting things, I was busy suggesting something to myself. What I was suggesting was that these guys can never perform on demand, because they're all as genuine as a pile of $3 bills. Johnny looked at the other reporters, except for Bright, who looked rather embarrassed. They were watching avidly. They looked like the nurses peering at him through the glass. Suddenly he felt like a Christian in a pit full of lions. They win either way, he thought. If I can tell him something, they've got a full front story, got a front page story, and if I can't, if I refuse to try, they've got another kind of story. Well, Dassault asked. The medallion swung back and forth below his fists. Johnny looked at Weswick, but Weswick was looking away, disgusted. Give it to me, Johnny said. Dassault handed it over. Johnny put the medallion in his palm. It was a St. Christopher medallion. He dropped the fine link chain on top of it like a crisp little yellow heap and closed his hands over it. Dead silence fell in the room. The handful of doctors and nurses standing by the lounge doorway had been joined by half a dozen others, some of them dressed in street clothes and on their way out of the hospital for the night. A crowd of patients had gathered at the end of the hallway leading to the front door, or to the first floor TV and game lounge. The people who had come from the regular early evening visiting hours had drifted over from the main lobby. A feeling of thick tension lay in the air like a humming power cable. Johnny stood silent, pale and thin in his white shirt and oversized blue jeans. The St. Christopher medal clamped so tightly in his right hand that the cords of his wrist stood out clearly in the glare of the TV light bars. In front of him, sober, impeccable, and judgmental in his dark suit, Dassault stood in the adversary position. The moment seemed to stretch out interminably. No one coughed or whispered. Oh, Johnny said softly, then. It is it. His fingers loosened slowly. He looked at Dassault. Well, Dassault asked, but the authority was suddenly gone from his voice. The tired, nervous young man who had answered the reporter's questions seemed also to be gone. There was a half smile on Johnny's lips, and there was nothing warm about it. The blue of his eyes had darkened. They had grown cold and silent. Weswick saw it and felt a chill of gooseflesh. He later told his wife that it had been the face of a man looking through a high-powered microscope and observing an interesting specimen of paramecium. It's your sister's medallion, he said to Dassault. Her name is Anne, but everyone called her Terry. Your older sister. You loved her. You almost worshipped the ground she walked on. Suddenly, terribly, Johnny Smith's voice began to climb and change. It became the cracked and unsure voice of an adolescent. It's for when you cross Libson Street against the lights, Terry, or when you're out parking with one of those guys from EL. Don't forget, Terry. Don't forget. The plump woman who had asked Johnny who the Democrats would nominate next year uttered a frightened little moan. One of the TV cameramen muttered, Holy Jesus, in a hoarse voice. Stop it, Dassault whispered. His face had gone a sick shade of gray. His eyes bulged, and spittle shone like chrome on his lower lip in this harsh light. His hands moved for the medallion, which was now looped on its fine gold chain over Johnny's fingers. But his hands moved with no power or authority. The medallion swung back and forth, throwing off hypnotic gleams of light. Remember me, Terry, the adolescent voice began. Stay clean, Terry. Please, for God's sake, stay clean. Stop it, you bastard! Now Johnny spoke in his own voice again. It was speed, wasn't it? Then meth. She died of a heart attack at 27. But she wore it 10 years, Raj. She remembered you. She never forgot. Never forgot. Never, never, never. The medallion slipped from his fingers and struck the floor with a small, musical sound. Johnny stared away into emptiness for a moment, his face calm and cool and distant. Dassault grubbed at his feet for the medallion, sobbing hoarsely in the stunned silence. A flash bulb popped, and Johnny's face cleared and became his own again. Horror touched it, and then pity. He knelt clumsily beside Dassault. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "You cheapskate, bastard hoaxer!" Dassault screamed at him. "It's a lie, all a lie, all a lie!" He struck Johnny a clumsy, open-handed blow on the neck, and Johnny fell over, striking his head on the floor hard. He saw stars. Uproar. He was dimly aware that Dassault was pushing his way blindly through the crowd and toward the doors. People milled around Dassault, around Johnny. He saw Dassault through a forest of legs and shoes. Then Weswick was beside him, helping him to sit up. "John, are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "Not as bad as I hurt him. I'm okay." He struggled to his feet. Hands, maybe Weswick's, maybe someone else's, helped him. He felt dizzy and sick, almost revolted. This had been a mistake, a terrible mistake. Someone screamed piercingly. The stout woman who had asked about the Democrats. Johnny saw Dassault pitch forward to his knees, grope at the sleeve of the stout woman's print blouse, and then slide tiredly forward onto the tile near the doorway he had been trying to reach. The St. Christopher medal was still in one hand. "Fainted," someone said. "Fainted dead away. I'll be damned." "My fault," Johnny said to Sam Weswick. His throat felt close and tight with shame, with tears. "All my fault." "No," Sam said. "No, John." But it was. He shook loose of Weswick's hand and went to where Dassault lay. Coming around now, eyes blinking dazedly at the ceiling, two of the doctors had come over to where he lay. "Is he all right?" Johnny asked. He turned toward the woman reporter in the slack suit, and she shrank from him. A cramp of fear passed over her face. Johnny turned the other way, toward the TV reporter who had asked him if he'd had any flashes before his accident. It suddenly seemed very important that he explain to someone. "I didn't mean to hurt him," he said. "Honest to God, I never meant to hurt him. I didn't know." The reporter backed up a step. "No," he said. "Of course you didn't. He was asking for it. Anybody could see that. Just don't touch me, huh?" Johnny looked at him dumbly, lips quivering. He was still in shock, but beginning to understand. Oh, yes. He was beginning to understand. The TV reporter tried to smile and could only produce a death's head rictus. "Don't touch me, Johnny, please." "It's not like that," Johnny said, or tried to. Later, he was never sure if any sound had come out. "Don't touch me, Johnny, okay?" The reporter backed up to where his cameraman was packing his gear. Johnny stood and watched him. He began to shake all over. Part 3. "It's for your own good, John," Weswick said. The nurse stood behind him, a white ghost, a sorcerer's apprentice, with his hands hovering above a small, wheeled medication table. A junkie's paradise of sweet dreams. "No," John said. He was still shaking, and now now there were cold sweats as well. "No more shots. I've had it up to here with shots." "A pill, then." "No more pills either. To help you sleep." "Will he be able to sleep? That man Dassault?" "He asked for it," the nurse murmured, and then flinched as Weswick turned toward her. But Weswick smiled crookedly. "She's right, he said. "The man asked for it. He thought you were selling empty bottles, John. A good night's sleep, and you'll be able to put this in perspective. I'll sleep on my own." "Johnny, please." It was 11:15. The TV across the room had just gone off. Johnny and Sam had watched a filmed story together. It had been a second lined right after the bills Ford had vetoed. My own story made it better theater, Johnny thought, with morbid amusement. Film footage of a bald-headed Republican mouthing platitudes about the national budget just didn't compare with the film clip that Wobby cameraman had gotten here earlier this evening. The clip had ended with the salt plunging across the floor, with his sister's medal clenched in his hand, and then crashing down in a faint, clutching at the woman reporter the way a drowning man might clutch at a straw. When the TV anchorman went on to the police dog and the 400 pounds of pot, Weswick had left briefly and had come back with the news that the hospital switchboard had jammed up with calls for him even before the report was over. The nurse with the medication had shown up a few minutes later, leading Johnny to believe that Sam had gone down the nurse's station to do more than check on incoming calls. At that instant, the telephone rang. Weswick swore softly under his breath. I told them to hold them all. Don't answer it, John. But John already had it. He listened for a moment, then nodded. Yes, that was right. He put a hand over the receiver. It's my dad, he said. He uncovered the receiver. Hi, Dad. I guess you. He listened. A small smile on his lips faded and was replaced by an expression of dawning horror. His lips moved slightly. John, what is it? Weswick asked sharply. All right, Daddy, Johnny said, almost in a whisper. Yes, Cumberland General. I know where it is. Just above Jerusalem's lot. Okay. All right, Daddy. His voice broke. His eyes were tearless but glistening. I know that, Dad. I know that, Daddy. I love you too. I'm sorry. Listened. Yes, it was, Johnny said. I'll see you, Daddy. Yes. Goodbye. He hung up the phone, the heels of his hands to his eyes, and pressed. Johnny. Sam leaned forward, took one of his hands away, and held it gently. Is it your mother? Yeah, it's my mother. Heart attack? Stroke, Johnny said. Sam Weswick made a small pained hissing between his teeth. They were watching the TV news. Neither of them had any idea, and I came on. She had a stroke. Christ, she's in the hospital. Now, if something happens to my dad, we got a triple play. He uttered a high scream of laughter. His eyes rolled wildly from Sam to the nurse and back to Sam again. It's a good talent, he said. Everybody should have it. The laugh came again, so like a scream. How bad is she? Sam asked. He doesn't know. Johnny swung his legs out of bed. He had changed back to the hospital gown, and his feet were bare. What do you think you're doing? Sam asked sharply. What does it look like? Johnny got up, and for a moment it seemed that Sam would push him back onto the bed. But he only watched Johnny limp over to the closet. Don't be ridiculous. You're not ready for this, John. Unmindful of the nurse, they had seen his bare tail enough times, God knew. Johnny let the gown drop around his feet. The thick, twisting scars stood out on the backs of his knees and dimpled into the scant swell of his calves. He began to rummage in the closet for clothes and came up with a white shirt and jeans he had worn to the news conference. John, I absolutely forbid this. As your doctor and your friend, I tell you, it is madness. Forbid all you want. I'm going, Johnny said. He began to dress. His face wore that expression of distant preoccupation that Sam associated with his trances. The nurse gawed. Nurse, you might as well go back to your station, Sam said. Unless I knew Daddy had him. I don't think I have any. Can you take this? I'm done with it for now. Yeah, I don't have them. I think Daddy has them. I thought I had some, but I'm not seeing them. I know I have a little bit of a mess over here with all my pens and pencils and lollipops. I did. I had my husband go get me lollipops last week. I was like, I want lollipops. $1.25 for 8. And I still got 3 left. They're gum. They're gum pops. I got 4 sour apple, and I got grape, and I got cherry, and I got watermelon. I still have watermelon. Yeah. So, I was happy. Ooh. Anyway, back to where we're going. She backed to the door, stood there for a moment, and then left. reluctantly. Johnny, Sam said. He got up, went to him, and put a hand on his shoulder. You didn't do it. Johnny shook his hand off. I did it all right, he said. She was watching me when it happened. He began to button the shirt. You urged her to take her medicine, and she stopped. Johnny looked at Wesett for a moment, and then went back to buttoning his shirt. If it hadn't happened tonight, it would have happened tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year, or in 10 years. No, it would not have been 10 years, or even one, and you know it. Why are you so anxious to pin this tale on yourself? Because of that smug reporter? Is it maybe an inverted kind of self-pity, an urge to believe that you have been cursed? Johnny's face twisted. She was watching me when it happened. Don't you get that? Are you so fucking soft you don't get that? She was planning a strenuous trip all the way to California and back. You told me that yourself. A symposium of some kind. A highly emotional sort of thing, from what you have said. Yes? Yes. It would almost certainly have happened then. A stroke is not lightning out of the blue from the blue sky, Johnny. Johnny buttoned the jeans and then sat down as if the act of dressing had tired him out too much to do more. His feet were still bare. Yeah, he said. Yeah, you may be right. Sense? He sees sense, thank the Lord. But I still have to go, Sam. Wesett turned up his hands. And do what? She's in the hands of her doctors and her God. This is the situation. Better than anyone else, you must understand. Or that is the situation. My dad will need me, Johnny said softly. I understand that too. How will you go? It's nearly midnight. By bus. I'll grab a cab. Yoop. Over to Pete's candlelighter. The greyhounds still stop there, don't they? You don't have to do that, Sam said. Johnny was groping under the chair for his shoes and not finding them. Hey, will you do me a favor?
Yeah?
Will you go up and grab me a pair of socks out of my top drawer?
Why?
Because my feet are cold. I don't know where my slippers are.
You can use mine.
I don't know where my slippers are. Just give me a pair of socks out of my drawer, please.
You can use my socks.
No, I want my socks. Goofball. And not finding them, Sam got them from under the bed and handed them to him. I'll drive you down. Johnny looked up at him. You'd do that? If you'll take a mild tranquilizer, yes. But your wife, you realized in a confused sort of way that the only concrete thing he knew about Weseck's personal life was that his mother was living in California. I'm divorced, Weseck said. A doctor has to be out at all hours of the night, unless he's a podiatrist or a dermatologist. My wife saw the bed as half empty rather than half full, so she filled it with a variety of men. I'm sorry, Johnny said, embarrassed. You spend far too much time being sorry, John. Sam's face was gentle, and his eyes were stern. Put on your shoes. Chapter 12. I'm going to put socks on first. I'm putting socks on first. I'm cold. I don't know where my other slippers. Like, I have one, but I don't know where the other one is, so I put one up. Like, Phoebe decided to try to eat it. Where's the dogs?
Sitting there.
Oh, they are laying down?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, are you going by the Goonies live back?
I don't know. I'll have to think about it. Because you did spend, quite a bit on your game this weekend.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I know it's a good point. Plus, Christmas is coming up.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. Didn't you think? Yeah. You guys want to see how much I'm in the unicorns? Let me see where the top of this is.
And
Taking a
are you going to help me with this?
To get a blanket.
Pieces?
Your brother was helping.
Oh, I didn't know
I
that.
have blankets. You guys got to see this. So I have blankets. I have stuffies. I have slippers. I have clothes. What?
I don't have instructions to, get the vehicle. The vehicle.
Then look it up on your phone.
My phone's upstairs.
Well, then look up this vehicle instructions, and it'll come up. Okay? All right. I'm determined he's going to help himself one day. A latte. I decided to get caramel today. Brown butter caramel is a very, very strong taste. Just saying. Chapter 12, Part 1. Hospital to hospital, Johnny thought dreamily, flying gently along on the small blue pill he had taken just before he and Sam left the EMMC and climbed into Sam's 75 Eldorado. Hospital to hospital, person to person, station to station. In a queer, secret way, he enjoyed the trip. It was the first time out of the hospital in almost 5 years. The night was clear. The Milky Way sprawled across the sky in an unwinding clock spring of light. A half moon followed them over the dark tree line as they fled south through Palmyra, Newport, Pittsburgh.
This right here.
Pittsfield. What is that?
No, it says Lego Builder.
Okay.
It has instructions.
Let me see what it says. Build and play, easy Lego packing challenge. I don't know if it'll have what you're looking for, bud.
Okay, just the.
Maybe it might.
Lego friends. Oh, it needs to scan them. Good.
It looks like it's for little kids.
Oh, that's a good point.
Hold on. Let me see. Found this not very helpful, but I can't tell what piece I need because there are two that look identical. Big fan of the app. Digital instructions are so simple. Try it out. See if you can find one of yours, okay?
Okay.
All right.
I may have to sit somewhere.
Find a seat. There's chairs there.
And move this thing.
As they fled south through Palmyra, Newport, Pittsfield, Benton, Clinton, the car whispered along in near total silence. Low music, Hayden, issued from the 4 speakers of the stereo tape player. Came to the hospital, and the Cleves Mills Rescue Squad ambulance went to another in a Cadillac, he thought. He didn't let it bother him. It was just enough to ride, to float along on the track, to let the problem of his mother, I got an itch. It's like dog hair or something on my nose. His new ability, and the people who wanted to pry into his soul.
Accept selection or accept necessary?
What? I don't know. I can't see.
Do I need to?
Experience data, necessary data. Yeah, you're fine. Well, now you can search and see if you can find your sets. So type in, like, I don't know, Lego Dimensions or something. Wanted to pry into his soul. He asked for it. Just don't touch me, huh? Rest in the temporary limbo. Wezek didn't talk. Occasionally he hummed snatches to the music. Johnny watched the stars. He watched the turnpike, nearly deserted this late. It enrolled ceaselessly in front of them. They went through the toll gate in Augusta, and Wezek took a time and toll ticket. Then they went on again. Gardner, Sabatus, Lewiston. Nearly 5 years, longer than some convicted murderers spend in the slam. He slept, dreamed. Johnny, his mother said in his dream. Johnny, make me better, make me well. She was in beggar's rags. She was crawling toward him over cobblestones. Her face was white. Thin blood ran from her knees. White lace squirmed from her thin hair. Oh, white lice squirmed from her thin hair. She held shaking hands out to him. The power of God working in you, she said. It's a great responsibility, Johnny. A great trust. You must be worthy. He took her hands, closed his own over them, and said, Spirits, depart from this woman. She stood up, healed. She cried in a voice that was filled with a strong and terrible triumph. Healed, my son has healed me. His work is great upon the earth. He tried to protest, to tell her that he didn't want to do great works, or heal, or speak in tongues, to divine the future, or find those things that had been lost. He tried to tell her, but his tongue wouldn't obey the command of his brain. Then she was past him, striding off down the cobbled street, her posture cringing and
That's where it says
servile.
retired from the thesis. This right here, the orange one. The letter orange edge.
Yes, it's retired, but start building. And click one, and it looks like it's loading. I don't understand that.
Oh, wait,
I don't understand what that is trying to do.
It's loading, remember?
Is that what that is loading?
Yeah, let me.
All right, try it. See if it'll load for a little bit. Down the cobbled street, her posture cringing and servile, but somehow arrogant at the same time. Her voice belled like a clarion. Saved, Savior, saved, Savior. He screamed it, actually. And to his horror, he saw that there had been thousands of others behind her, maybe millions, all of them maimed or disformed or in terror. The stout lady reporter was there, needing to know who the Democrats would nominate for the presidency in '76. There was a death-eyed farmer in eyeballs with a picture of his son, a smiling young man in Air Force blues, who had been reported MIA over in Hanoi in '72. He needed to know if his son was dead or alive. A young woman who looked like Sarah with tears in her smooth cheeks held up a baby with a hydrocephalic head on which blue veins were traced like runes of doom. An old man with his fingers turned into clubs with arthritis, and others. They stretched for miles. They would wait patiently. They would kill him with their mute, bludgeoning need. Saved, his mother's voice cried back imperatively. Savior, saved, saved. He tried to tell them that he could neither heal nor save. But before he could open his mouth to make the denial, the first had laid hands on him and was shaking him. The shaking was real enough. It was Wesig's hand on his arm. Bright orange light filled the car, turning the interior as bright as day. It was nightmare light, turning Sam's kind face into the face of a hobgoblin. For a moment he thought the nightmare was still going on, and then he saw the light was coming from the parking lot lamps. They had changed those too, apparently, while he was in his coma, from hard white to weird orange that lay on the skin like paint. Where are we? He asked thickly. The hospital, Sam said. Cumberland General. Oh, all right. He sat up. The dream seemed to slide off him in fragments, still littering the floor of his mind like something broken and not yet swept up. Are you ready to go in? Yes, Johnny said. They crossed the parking lot amid the soft creak of summer crickets in the woods. Fireflies stitched through the darkness. The image of his mother was very much on him, but not so much that he was unable to enjoy the soft and fragrant smell of the night and the feel of the faint breeze against his skin. There was time to enjoy the health of the night and the feeling of health coming inside him. In the context of why he was here, the thought seemed almost obscene, but only almost. And it wouldn't go away. Part 2. Herb came down the hallway to meet him. Johnny saw his father was wearing old pants, shoes with no socks, and his pajama shirt. It told Johnny a lot about the suddenness with which it had come. It told him more than he wanted to know. Son, he said. He looked smaller somehow. He tried to say more but couldn't. Johnny hugged him and Herb burst into tears. He sobbed against Johnny's shirt. Daddy, he said. That's all right, Daddy, that's all right. His father put his arms on Johnny's shoulders and wept. Weswick turned away and began to inspect the pictures on the walls in different watercolors by local artists. Herb began to recover himself. He swiped his arm across his eyes and said, Look at me, still in my PJ top. I had time to change before the ambulance came. I guess I never thought of it. Must be getting senile. No, you're not. Well, he said. He shrugged. Your doctor friend brought you down. That was nice of you, Dr. Weswick. Sam shrugged. It was nothing. Johnny and his father walked toward the small waiting room and sat down. Daddy, is she? She's sinking, Herb said. He seemed calmer now, conscious but sinking. She's been asking for you, Johnny. I think she's been holding on for you. My fault, Dad, Johnny said. All this is my fault. The pain of his ear startled him, and he stared at his father, astonished. Herb had seized his ear and twisted it firmly. So much for the role reversal of having his father cry in his arms. The old twist the ear trick had been a punishment Herb had reserved for the gravest of errors. Johnny couldn't remember having his ear twisted since he was 13, and had gotten fooling around with their old rumbler. He had inadvertently pushed in the clutch, and the old car had rumbled silently downhill to crash into their back shed. Don't you ever say that, Herb said. Geez, Dad. Herb let go, and a little smile lurking just below the corners of his mouth. Forget all about the old twist of the ear, huh? Probably thought I had to. Now, no such luck, Johnny. Johnny stared at his father, still dumbfounded. Don't you ever blame yourself. But she was watching that damn news, yes. She was ecstatic. She was thrilled. Then she was on the floor, her poor old mouth opening and closing like she was a fish out of water. Herb leaned closer to his son. The doctor won't come right out and tell me, but he asked me about heroic measures. I told him none of that stuff. She committed her own kind of sin, Johnny. She presumed to know the mind of God. So don't you ever blame yourself for her mistake. Fresh tears glinted in his eyes. His voice roughened. God knows I spent my life loving her, and it got hard in the late going. Maybe this is just the best thing. Can I see her? Yes. She's at the end of the hall, room 35. She's expecting you. They're expecting you, and so is she. Just one thing, Johnny. I agree with anything and everything she might say. Don't let her die thinking it was all for nothing. No, he paused. Are you coming with me? Not now. Maybe later. Johnny nodded and walked up the hall. The lights were turned down low for the nighttime. The brief moment in a soft, kind summer night seemed far away now, but his nightmare in the car seemed very close. Room 35, Vera Helen Smith, the little card on the door read. Had he known her middle name was Helen? It seemed he must have. Seriously? Go take those.
Anything to find the pieces with the hoverboard.
Can it wait a little bit, like maybe half an hour or so?
Okay.
Thank you. I can't hear it when it goes digging through. I feel so bad. It seems he must have, although he couldn't remember. But he could remember other things. Her bringing him an ice cream bar wrapped in her handkerchief one bright summer day at Old Orchard Beach, smiling and gay. He and his mother and father playing rummy for matches. Later, after the religious business began to deepen in its hold on her, she wouldn't have cards in the house, not even to play cribbage with. He remembered the day the bee had stung him, and he ran to her, bawling his head off. And she had kissed the swelling and pulled out the stinger with tweezers, and then had wrapped the wound in a strip of cloth that had been dipped in baking soda.
Mom, I wait on the instructions.
Yes, just for a little bit.
No, seriously, I want to play Disney music.
Okay, go play the mini-verse. I will let you know when I'm done. He pushed the door open and went in. She was a vague hump in the bed, Johnny thought. That's what I looked like. A nurse was taking her pulse. She turned when the door opened and the dim hall lights flashed on her spectacles. Are you Mrs. Smith's son? Yes. Johnny? Her voice rose from the hump in the bed, dry and hollow, rattling with death as a few pebbles will rattle in an empty gourd. The voice, God help him, made his skin crawl. He moved closer. Her face was twisted in a snarling mask on the left-hand side. The hand on the counterpane was a claw. Stroke, he thought. What the old people call a shock. Yes, that's better. That's what she looks like she's had a bad shock. Is it you, John? It's me, Ma. Johnny, is that you? Yes, Ma. He came closer yet and forced himself to take the bony claw. I want my Johnny, she said quiverously. The nurse shot him a pitying look, and he found himself wanting to smash his fist through it. Would you leave us alone? He asked. I really shouldn't Come on, she's my mother, and I want some time alone with her, Johnny said. What about it? Well, bring me my juice, Dad, his mother cried hoarsely. Feel like I could drink a quart. Would you get out of here? He cried at the nurse. He was filled with terrible sorrow, of which he could not even find the focus. It seemed like a whirlpool going down into darkness. The nurse left. Ma, he said, sitting beside her. That weird feeling of doubled time, of reversal, would not leave him. How many times had she sat over his bed like this, perhaps holding his dry hand and talking to him? You got all purple and pink. Awesome. Thank you. He recalled the timeless period when the room had seemed so close to him. Seen through a gauzy placental membrane, his mother's face bending over him, thundering senseless sounds slowly into his upturned face. Ma, he said again, and kissed the hook that had replaced her hand. Give me those nails, I can do that, she said. Her left eye seemed frozen in its orbit. The other rolled wildly. It was the eye of a gut-shot horse. I want Johnny. Ma, I'm here. Johnny, 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 Ma, he said, afraid the nurse would come back. You? She broke off, and her head turned toward him a little. Bend over here, where I can see, she whispered. He did, and she asked. You came, and he did as she asked. You came, she said. Thank you. Thank you. Tears began to ooze from the good eye. The bad one, the one on the side of her face that had been frozen by the shock, stared indifferently upward. Sure I came. I saw you, she whispered. What a power of God has given you. What a power God has given you, Johnny. Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say it was so? Yes, you did. He has a job for you, she said. Don't run from him, Johnny. Don't hide away in a cave like Elijah, or make him send a big fish to swallow you up. Don't do that, John. No, I won't. He held her claw hand. His head throbbed. Not that the potter, but the potter's clay, John. Not the potter, but the potter's clay. Remember. All right. Remember that, she said stridently, and he thought, she's going back into nonsense land. But she didn't. At least she went no further into nonsense land than she had been since he came out of his coma. Heed the still, small voice when it comes, she said. Yes, Ma, I will. Her head turned a tiny bit on the pillow, and was she smiling? You think I'm crazy, I guess. She twisted her head a little more, so she could look directly at him. But that doesn't matter. You'll know the voice when it comes. It'll tell you what to do. It told Jeremiah and Daniel and Amos and Abraham. It'll come to you. It'll tell you. And when it does, Johnny, do your duty. Okay, Ma. What a power, she murmured. Her voice was growing furry and indistinct. What a power God has given you. I knew. I always knew. Her voice trailed off. The good eye closed. The other stared blankly forward. Johnny sat with her another 5 minutes, then got up to leave. His hand was on the doorknob, and he was easing the door open when her dry, rattling voice came again, chilling him with its implacable, positive command. I like that. Nice. We can use it again.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We just have to use hot water and spare gloves.
Can't beat that. Good. Do your duty, John. Yes, Ma. It was the last time he ever spoke to her. She died at 5 minutes past 8 in the morning on August 20th. Somewhere north of them, Walt and Sarah Hazlett were having a discussion about Johnny that was almost an argument. And somewhere south of them, Greg Stilson was cutting himself some prime asshole. Okay. Chapter 13, Part 1. You don't understand, Greg Stilson said in a voice of utter, reasonable patience to a kid sitting in the lounge at the back of the Ridgeway police station. The kid, shirtless, was tilted back in a padded folding chair and drinking a bottle of Pepsi. He was smiling indulgently at Greg Stilson, not understanding that twice was all Greg Stilson ever repeated himself. Understanding that there was one prime asshole in the room, not yet understanding who it was. The realization would have to be brought home to him, forcibly if necessary. Outside, the late August morning was bright and warm. Birds sang in the trees, and Greg felt his destiny was closer than ever. That was why he would be careful with his prime asshole. This was no long-haired bike freak with a bad case of bow legs and BO. This kid was a college boy. His hair was moderately long, but squeaky clean. And he was George Harvey's nephew. Not that George cared for him much. George had fought his way across Germany in 1945, and he had 2 words for those long-haired freaks. And those 2 words were not happy birthday. But he was blood. And George was a man to be reckoned with on the town council. See what you can do with him, George had told Greg when Greg informed him that Chief Wiggins had arrested his sister's kid. But his eyes said, don't hurt him, he's blood. The kid was looking at Greg with lazy contempt. I understand, he said. Your deputy dog took my shirt, and I want it back. And you better understand something. If I don't get it back, I'm going to have American Civil Liberties Union down on your red neck. Greg got up, went to the steel gray file cabinet opposite the soda machine, pulled out his key ring, selected a key, and opened the cabinet. From atop a pile of accident and traffic forms, he took a red T-shirt. He spread it open so the legend on it was clear. Baby, let's fuck. You wearing this? You were wearing this, Greg said, in that same mild voice, on the street. The kid rocked on his back legs of his chair and swigged some more Pepsi, the little indulgent smile playing around his mouth. Almost a sneer. Did not change. That's right, he said. And I want it back. It's my property. Greg's head began to ache. This smartass didn't realize how easy it would be. The room was soundproofed, and there had been times when that soundproofing had muffled screams. No, he didn't realize. He didn't understand. But keep your hand on it. Don't go overboard. Don't upset the apple cart. Easy to think. Usually easy to do. Sometimes his temper. His temper got out of hand. Greg reached into his pocket and pulled out his Bic lighter. So you just tell your Gestapo chief and my fascist uncle that the First Amendment, he paused, eyes widening a little. Where do you, hey! Taking no notice, and at least outwardly calm, Greg struck a light. The Bic's gas flame vroomed upward, and Greg lit the kid's t-shirt on fire. It burned quite well, actually. The front leg of the kid's chair came down with a bang, and he leaped toward Greg with his bottle of Pepsi still in his hand. The self-satisfied little smirk was gone, replaced with a look of wide-eyed shock and surprise, and the anger of a spoiled brat who has had everything his own way for too long. No one ever called him runt, Greg Stilson thought. And his headache worsened. Oh, he was going to have to be careful. Give me that, the kid shouted. Greg was holding the shirt out, pinching together with 2 fingers at the neck, ready to drop it when it was too hot. Give me that, you asshole. That's mine. Greg planted his hand in the middle of the kid's bare chest and shoved him as hard as he could, which was hard indeed. The kid went flying across the room, the anger dissolving into total shock, and, at last, what Greg needed to see, fear. He dropped the shirt on the tile floor, picking up the kid's Pepsi, and poured what was left in the bottle onto the smoldering t-shirt. It hissed balefully. The kid was getting up slowly, his back pressed against the wall. Greg caught his eyes with his own. The kid's eyes were brown and very, very wide. We're going to reach an understanding, Greg said, and the words seemed distant to him, behind the sick thud in his head. We're going to have a little seminar right here in this back room about just who's the asshole. You got my meaning? We're going to reach some conclusions. Isn't that what you college boys like to do? Reach conclusions? The kid drew breath in hitches. He wet his lips, seemed about to speak, and then yelled, "Help!" Yeah, you need help, all right, Greg said. I'm going to give you some too. Yeah, you're crazy, George Harvey's nephew said, and then yelled again, louder, "Help!" I may be, Greg said. Hold on. Yes. Yes. What? Okay. For hot water? Okay. I take it to keep warm in the winter? Yeah, we can do that. All right. Send me the link and I'll get it, okay? Okay? Okay. Love you. All right. Bye. You can get whatever you want to get. Sheesh. stuff for work. I may be, Greg said. Sure, but what we got to find out, Sonny, is who the prime asshole is. See what I mean? He looked down at the Pepsi bottle in his hand, and suddenly he swung it savagely against the corner of the steel cabinet. It shattered, and the kids saw the scatter of glass on the floor and the jagged neck in Greg's hand. Pointing toward him, he screamed. The crotch of his jeans, faded almost white, suddenly darkened. His face went the color of old parchment, and as Greg walked toward him, grit and glass under the work boots he wore summer and winter, he cringed against the wall. When I go out on the street, I wear a white t-shirt, Greg said. He was grinning, showing white teeth. Sometimes a tie. Oh, a white shirt, not a white t-shirt. I wear a white shirt. Sometimes a tie. When you go out on the street, you wear some rag with a filthy saying on it. So who's the asshole, kiddo? Greg Harvey's nephew whined something. His bulging eyes never left the spears of glass jutting from the bottleneck in Greg's hand. I'm standing here, high and dry, Greg said, coming a little closer. And you got piss running down both legs into your shoes. So who's the asshole? He began to jab the bottleneck lightly toward the kid's bare and sweaty midriff, and George Harvey's nephew began to cry. This was the sort of kid that was tearing the country in two, Greg thought. A thick whine of fury buzzed and coursed in his head. Stinking, yellow-belly, crybaby assholes like this. Ah, but don't hurt him. Don't kick over the apple cart. I sound like a human being, Greg said, and you sound like a pig in a grease pit, boy. So who's the asshole? He jabbed with the bottle again. One of the jagged glass points dimpled the kid's skin just below the right nipple and brought a tiny bead of blood. The kid howled. I'm talking to you, Greg said. You better answer up. Same as you'd answer up one of your professors. Who's the asshole? The kid sniveled, but made no coherent sound. You answer up if you want to pass this exam, Greg said. I'll let your guts loose all over this floor, boy. And in that instant, he meant it. He couldn't look directly at this welling drop of blood. It would send him crazy if he did. George Harvey's nephew, or not, who's the asshole? Me, the kid said, and began to sob like a small child afraid of the boogeyman. The Alamogussalum that waits behind the closet door in the dead hours of the night. Greg smiled. The headache thumped and flared. Well, that's pretty good, you know. That's a start. But it's not quite good enough. I want you to say, I'm the asshole. I'm the asshole, the kid said, still sobbing. Snot flowing from his nose and hung there in a runner. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. Now I want you to say, I'm a prime asshole. I'm a prime asshole. Now, you just say one more thing and maybe we can be done here. You say, thank you for burning up that dirty shirt, Mayor Stilson. The kid was eager now. The kid saw his way clear. Thanks for burning up that dirty shirt. In a flash, Greg ran one of the points from left to right across the kid's soft belly, bringing a line of blood. He barely broke the skin, but the kid howled as if all the devils of hell were behind him. You forgot to say Mayor Stilson, Greg said, and just like that it broke. The headache gave one more massive beat right behind his eyes and was gone. He looked down stupidly at the bottleneck in his hand and could barely remember how it had gotten there. Stupid damn thing. He had almost thrown everything away over one numbnuts kid. Mayor Stilson, the kid was screaming. His terror was perfect and complete. Mayor Stilson, Mayor Stilson, Mayor That's good, Greg said. Son, Mayor Stilson, Mayor Stilson, Mayor. Greg whacked him hard across the face, and the kid rapped his head on the wall. He fell silent, his eyes wide and blank. Greg stepped very close to him. He reached out. He closed one hand around each of the kids' ears. He pulled the kid's face forward until their noses were touching. Their eyes were less than half an inch apart. Now, your uncle is a power in this town, he said softly, holding the kid's ears like handles. The kid's eyes were huge and brown and swimming. I'm a power too, coming to be one. But I ain't no George Harvey. He was born here, raised here, everything. And if you was to tell your uncle what went on in here, he might take a notion to finish me in Ridgeway. The kid's lips were twitching in a nearly soundless blubber. Greg shook the boy's head slowly back and forth by the ears, banging their noses together. He might not. He was pretty damn mad about that shirt. But he might. Blood ties are strong ties. So you think about this, son. If you was to tell your uncle what went on here and your uncle squeezed me out, I guess I would come along and kill you. Do you believe that? Yeah, the kid whispered. His cheeks were wet and gleaming. Yes, sir, Mayor Stilson. Yes, sir, Mayor Stilson. Greg let go of his ears. Yeah, he said, I'd kill you. But first, I'd tell anybody that'd listen about how you pissed yourself and stood there crying with snot running out of your nose. He turned and walked away quickly, as if the kid smelled bad, and went to the cabinet again. He got a box of Band-Aids from one of the shelves and tossed them across to the kid, who flinched back and fumbled them. He hastened to pick them up off the floor, as if Stilson might attack him again for missing. Greg pointed. Bathroom over there. You clean yourself up. I'm going to leave you a Ridgeway Pal sweatshirt. I want it mailed back. Clean. No bloodstains, you understand? Yes, the kid whispered. Sir? Stilson screamed at him. Sir, 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 can't you remember that? Sir. The kid moaned. Yes, sir, yes, sir. They don't teach you kids respect for nothing, Greg said. Not for nothing. The headache was trying to come back. He took several deep breaths and quelled it. But his stomach felt miserably upset. Okay, that's the end. I just want to offer you one good piece of advice. Don't you make the mistake of getting back on my damn college this fall. Oh, of getting back to your damn college this fall, or whenever, and start thinking this was some way it wasn't. Don't you try to kid yourself about Greg Stilson. Best forget, kid. By you, me, and George. Working this around in your mind until you think you could have another swing at it would be the worst mistake of your life, maybe the last. And with that, Greg left, taking one last contemptuous look at the kid standing there, his chest and belly caked with a minor few smears of overgrown 10-year-old who was struck out in the Little League playoffs. Oh, with minor smears of dried blood, his eyes wide, his lips trembling, he looked like an overgrown 10-year-old who had struck out in the Little League playoffs. Somehow I missed a whole line. Greg made a mental bet with himself that he would never see or hear from this particular kid again. And if he won the bet, it was a bet he won. Later that week, George Harvey stopped by the barber shop where Greg was getting a shave and thanked him for talking some sense into his nephew. You're good with these kids, Greg, he said. I don't know. They seem to respect you. Greg told him not to mention it. Oh, that's what he sent me. Okay. Part 2. While George Stilson was burning a shirt with an obscene saying on it in New Hampshire, Walt and Sarah Hazlitt were having a late breakfast in Bangor, Maine. Walt had the paper. He put his coffee cup down with a clink and said, "Your old boyfriend made the paper, Sarah." Sarah was feeding Denny. She was in her bathrobe, her hair something of a mess, her eyes still only about a quarter open. 80% of her mind was still asleep. There had been a party last night. The guest of honor had been Harrison Fisher, who had been New Hampshire's 3rd District congressman since dinosaurs walked the earth, and a sure candidate for re-election next year. It had been politic for her and Walt to go. Politic. That was a word that Walt used a lot lately. He had had lots more to drink than she had, and this morning he was dressed and apparently chipper, while she felt buried in a pile of sludge. It wasn't fair. "Blue," Denny remarked, and spat back a mouthful of mixed fruit. "That's not nice," Sarah said to Walt. "Are you talking about Johnny Smith, the one and only?" She got up and came around to Walt's side of the table. "He's all right, isn't he?" "Feeling good and kicking up Dickens by the sound of this," Walt said dryly. She had a hazy idea that it might be related to what had happened to her when she went to see Johnny, but the size of the headline shocked her. "Reawakened coma patient demonstrates psychic ability at dramatic news conference." The story was under David Bright's byline. The accompanying photo showed Johnny, still looking thin and in the obscuring glare of the flash, pitifully confused, standing over the sprawling body of a man the caption identified as Roger DeSault, a reporter for the Lewiston paper. "Reporter faints after revelation," the caption read. Sarah sank down into the chair next to Walt and began to read the article. This did not please Denny, who began to pound on the tray of his high chair for his morning egg. "I believe you're being summoned," Walt said. "Would you feed him, honey? He eats better for you anyway." Story continued, page 9, column 3. She folded the paper open. Page 9. "Flattery will get you everywhere." Walt said agreeably. He slipped off his sports coat and put on her apron. "Here it comes, Guy," he said, and began feeding Denny his egg. When she had finished the story, Sarah went back and read it again. Her eyes were drawn again and again to the picture, to Johnny's confused, horror-struck face. The people loosely grouped around the prone DeSault were looking at Johnny with an expression close to fear. She could understand that. She remembered kissing him and the strange, preoccupied look that had slipped over his face. And when he told her where to find the lost wedding ring, she had been afraid. But Sarah, what you were afraid of wasn't quite the same thing, was it? "Just a little more, big boy," Walt was saying, as if from 1,000 miles away. Sarah looked up at them, sitting together in a bar of mote-dusted sunlight, her apron flapping between Walt's knees. She was suddenly afraid again. She saw the ring sinking to the bottom of the toilet bowl, turning over and over. She heard the small clink as it struck the porcelain. She thought of Halloween masks, of the kids saying, "I love to see this guy take a beating." She thought of promises made and never kept, and her eyes went to his thin, newsprint face, looking out at her with such haggard, wretched surprise. "Gimmick, anyway," Walt said, hanging up her apron. He had gotten Denny to eat the egg, every bit of it, and now their son and heir was sucking contentedly away at a juice bottle. "Huh?" Sarah looked up as he came over to her. I said that for a man who must have almost $500,000 worth of hospital bills outstanding, it's a hell of a good gimmick. What are you talking about? What do you mean, gimmick? Sure, he said, apparently missing her anger. He could make $7,000, maybe $10,000 doing a book about the accident and the coma. And if he came out of the coma psychic, the sky's the limit. That's one hell of an allegation, Sarah said, and her voice was thin with fury. He turned to her, his expression first one of surprise and then of understanding. The understanding look made her angrier than ever. If she had a nickel for every time Walt Hazlitt had thought he understood her, they would fly first class to Jamaica. Look, I'm sorry I brought it up, he said. Johnny would no more lie than the Pope would, you know. He bellowed laughter, and in that moment she nearly picked up his own coffee cup and threw it at him. Instead, she locked her hands together tightly under the table and squeezed them. Then he goggled at his father and then burst into his own peal of laughter. Honey, Walt said, I have nothing against him. I have nothing against what he's doing. In fact, I respect him for it. If that fat old Mossick Fisher can go from a broke lawyer to a millionaire during 15 years in the House of Representatives, then this guy should have a perfect right to pick up as much as he can playing psychic. Johnny doesn't lie, she repeated tonelessly. It's a gimmick for the Blue Rinse Brigade who read the weekly tabloids and belong to the Universe Book Club, he said cheerily. Although I will admit that a little second sight might come in handy during jury selection in this damn Timmons trial. Johnny Smith doesn't lie, she repeated, and heard him saying, It slipped off your finger. You were putting his shaving stuff into one of those side pockets, and it just slipped off. You go up in the attic and look, Sarah. You'll see. But she couldn't tell Walt that. Walt didn't know she had been to see Johnny. Nothing wrong in going to see him, her mind offered uneasily. No, but how would he react to the news that she had thrown her original wedding ring into the toilet and flushed it away? He might not understand the sudden twitch of fear that had made her do it. Same fear she saw mirrored on those other newsprint faces, and to some degree on Johnny's own. No, Walt might not understand that at all. After all, throwing your wedding ring into the toilet and then pushing the flush did suggest a certain vulgar symbolism. All right, Walt was saying, he doesn't lie, but I just don't believe. Sarah said softly, Look at the people behind him, Walt. Look at their faces. They believe. Walt gave them a cursory glance. Sure. The way the kid believes in the magician as long as the trick is ongoing. You think this fella DeSalt was a shill? According to the article, he and Johnny had never met before. That's the only way the illusion will work, Sarah, Walt said patiently. It doesn't do a magician any good to pull a bunny out of a rabbit hutch, only out of a hat. Either Johnny Smith knew something, or he made a terrible good guess based on this guy DeSalt's behavior at the time. But I repeat, I respect him for it. He's got a lot of mileage out of it. If it turns him a buck, more power to him. In that moment, she hated him, loathed him, this man she had married. There was really nothing so terrible on the reverse side of his goodness, his steadiness, his mild good humor, just the belief, apparently grounded in the bedrock of his soul, that everybody was looking out for number one, and I have hair up my back again, each with his or her own little racket. This morning he could call a Harrison Fisher a fat old mossback. Last night he had been bellowing with laughter at Fisher's stories about Greg Stilson. the funny mayor of some town or other, and who might just be crazy enough to run as an independent in the House race next year. No, in the world of Walt Hazlitt, no one had psychic powers, and there were no heroes, and the doctrine of we have to change the system from within was all powerful. He was a good man, a steady man. He loved her and Denny, but suddenly her soul cried out for Johnny in the 5 years together of which they had been robbed, or a lifetime together, a child of darker hair. You better get going, babe, she said quietly. They'll have your guy Timmons in stock and bonds, or whatever they are. Sure, he smiled at her. The summation done, session adjourned. Still friends? Still friends. But he knew where the ring was. He knew. Walt kissed her, his right hand resting lightly on the back of her neck. He always had the same thing for breakfast. He always kissed her the same way. Some day they were going to Washington, and no one was psychic. 5 minutes later he was gone, backing their little red Pinto out onto Pond Street, giving his usual brief toot on the horn, and putting away. She was left alone with Denny, who was in the progress of strangling himself while he tried to wiggle under his high chair tray. You're going at that all wrong, Sluggo, Sarah said, crossing the kitchen and unlatching the tray. Blue, Denny said, disgusted with the whole thing. Speedy Tomato, their tomcat, sauntered into the kitchen at his usual slow, hip-shot, juvenile delinquent's stride, and Denny grabbed him, making little chuckling noises. Speedy laid his ears back and looked resigned. Sarah smiled a little and cleared the table. Inertia. A body at rest tends to remain at rest. And she was at rest. Never mind Walt's darker side. She had her own. She had no intention of doing more than sending Johnny a card at Christmas. It was better, safer that way. Because a body in motion tends to keep moving. Her life here was good. She had survived Dan. She had survived Johnny, who had been so unfairly taken from her. But so much in this world was unfair. She had come through her own personal rapids in this smooth water, and here she would stay. The sunshiny kitchen was not a bad place. Best to forget county fairs, wheels of fortune, and Johnny Smith's face. As she ran water in the sink to do the dishes, she turned on the radio and caught the beginning of the news. The first item made her freeze, with a just-washed plate in one hand. Her eyes looked out over their small backyard in startled contemplation. Johnny's mother had had a stroke while watching a TV report on her son's press conference. She had died this morning, not an hour ago. Sarah dried her hands, snapped off the radio, and pried Speedy Tomato out of Denny's hands. She carried her boy into the living room and popped him into the playpen. Danny protested his indignity with loud, lusty howls, of which she took no notice. She went to the telephone and called EMMC. A switchboard operator, who sounded tired of repeating the same piece of intelligence over and over again, told her that John Smith had discharged himself the night before, slightly before midnight. She hung up the phone and sat down in the chair. Denny continued to cry from his playpen. Water ran in the kitchen sink. After a while, she got up, went into the kitchen, and turned it off. And we will pause there for now. We're on chapter 14, so we're almost halfway through. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. Well, we're going to stop there. I need to get up and walk around, so. But 2 hours isn't bad. Plus a little bit of an interruption, so. Yeah. But, we will be back tonight. I'm thinking around 7-ish. So, I was out this morning and forgot potatoes. I'll think of something. Yeah, I'll think of something. I'm going to have a roast tonight and I'll just figure it out. Yeah, I always do. Anyway, I thank you all for being with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for subscribing and following, whatever it's called. I call it subscribing. It's calling following. I don't know the whole word anyway. But yeah, thank you all for being with me. I really appreciate it. The Reader's Nook is like a little book club. If you feel like getting the book to follow along, that's great. Yes, I do mess up sometimes and I leave it. Sometimes I go back and I reread it. It's just like if I was reading a book in my head, I would still go back and reread it. Nobody's perfect. So we read 10 to 13 today. So we did good. For some reason, the one on my thing doesn't want to be nice. There. Anyway, this will be up highlighted before tonight's episode. So I really appreciate y'all. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go and stretch my back and relax a little bit. So thank you all. I love y'all. I really do. And I will see you tonight. All right? Bye.